Africa's energy story is evolving fast, shaped by rising demand, new technologies and shifting global priorities. Bronwyn Seaborn recently spoke to James Mackay, CEO of the Energy Council of SA, on the sidelines of the Africa Unlocked conference in Cape Town. They unpacked Africa's role in the changing geopolitics of energy, the practical realities of scaling access, and whether the continent's policy and infrastructure are keeping pace. Here's that conversation.
It's important maybe to start off by positioning Africa in the geopolitical context, which is really being driven by physical wars and trade wars, very disruptive. But when it comes to energy, what we've seen is quite a distinct pullback on the climate change narrative, obviously led by the US withdrawal from the Paris Agreement, but also EU pulling back on green regulations. So I think we have to differentiate. That's a narrative issue which has definitely slowed down. There's much more a focus now on practical implementation. But what we do see is electrification demand. It continues to exponentially rise. EU is projecting a 60% increase over the next 10 years, driven by transport and industrial pivots into electricity. AI is looming. This is a huge consumer of baseload, cheap, clean power. So the fundamentals around demand, the ambition to keep going and invest globally are still there, but the narrative has changed. Interestingly enough, now India actually talks about a green discount. So they will build renewable energy, wind and solar, only at a discount to fossil fuels. That said, India is second only to China in their build rate, and China builds more wind and solar than the rest of the world put together every year. So I think that this practical implementation and investments versus climate ambition can be misleading, because there is a concern about the slowdown in the narrative, but actually there's a huge ambition at practical investment on the ground getting it done. So when it comes back to Africa, it's bankability, and bankability in the energy space really is going to be, do African countries have liberalized markets, strong regulatory environments? And then, yes, affordability is always going to be a concern, but there's huge opportunity and demand in Africa. And as you referenced, we do have an opportunity to leapfrog. We don't have to take these long learning curves, because actually the rest of the world have demonstrated what works and what doesn't. But being able to move at speed, I do think that we have to get the regulatory environment, liberalized markets implemented, and we have to expand and modernize grids. Then we really are in the game as Africa.
Those three things sound like such simple things when you say them, but they're quite mammoth tasks. Do you think you're making enough headway in terms of addressing those three things that you've outlined? Because it does take a lot of will to get regulatory environments into the correct spaces, etc. Do you think we have enough will to push on those three kind of pillars that you've outlined there? And I know it's hard. We talk about Africa almost as this homogenized area, and yet there are very country-specific challenges. But if we do have to take that bird's eye view, do you think enough is being done to make sure that we can meet this rising demand that you've put forward?
It was interesting. I recently participated in a global think tank under the World Energy Council, and the EU view was actually that Africa has overcome its paralysis in investment and is moving very quickly. And an example, again, if we look at South Africa, how rapidly we've moved on reforms, new legislation, etc., and very rapid increase in investments. So I think it's some positive news. We're also seeing improved planning and policy coherence. And we think in the South Africa context of our ERA amendment that has been promulgated, that a shift to the liberalized markets, the transmission development plan, the wholesale market code development. So there's a lot of good plans starting to come into place that gives clarity, better investment confidence. Certainly in the South Africa context, not having load shedding has been critical to start getting positive investment sentiment. I think that across the board, one of the biggest technical inhibitors is grid. And that remains a major challenge and a problem for Africa. We don't have regional grids. Our grids are weak. We don't have good regulatory environments around grid, and we don't have cost-reflective tariffs. And we are competing globally. Take UK as example. They're trying to build more grid in the next 5 years than they've built in the last 30 years. So grid is an international focus area, huge theme. And so we are, again, competing for skills, for components. So I think that is a technical challenge that we've got to work much harder at. But we are moving in the right direction.
Yes, I think one of the examples given here at the conference is that in Uganda, they've got all this hydropower, and yet they can't actually get it to anyone because of grid failings. And in South Africa, we know our grid as well, always susceptible to many grid failures. No one's exempt or doesn't understand the concept of load shedding, I think, although it's been quiet on that front. Let's bring it home. Let's take a look at South Africa specifically and our grid. A lot has been done in terms of maintenance, etc. And we can't ignore the good news around that. Yet it does still feel that our grid is rather vulnerable, right?
I don't think we are vulnerable. We have got a very robust grid. The challenge of managing deeper variability in this distributed energy system with lots of new technology, it's an international challenge and phenomenon. So we saw the Iberian Peninsula Spanish blackout. That's not the first global incident where sort of blackouts or grid challenges have happened. That happens at high degrees of renewable penetration, and the leading countries, certainly like the UK, around digital grid management, new digital technologies, modernization of grid, those, we are well behind that, but we also have very low levels of renewable penetration. So I think we should be very confident we could really accelerate renewable development in South Africa. We've got a great system operator. We actually have a very robust grid. I don't think that there are any challenges or kind of concerns around a grid collapse in the South Africa context. It will come, but I think, for the next 10, 15 years, we really need to put our head down and focus on new generation. So it's wind, solar, plus we have to start accelerating and building more gas to power, as well as battery storage. So those in combination will give us the energy security, because we do have to start decommissioning the oldest and most inefficient and high carbon coal stations from 2030 on. So that is, I think, has got to be our priority focus area.
And Eskom leading the charge in terms of that priority focus. Do you believe that they've got the will to do that? Is that the focus? Is that where we're going? Your confidence levels there that Eskom is looking at that intently?
Very difficult question, because there are pros and cons, and there's certain things that I think Eskom are doing very well, but they also inherited some really big challenges, and also very much an international norm. It's understood that moving from the centralized integrated utility into this liberalized, decentralized, distributed world with new technologies is very complex. As the incumbent, Eskom is also having to both, in a sense, cannibalize themselves, allow new generation, new competition, but they have to keep on propping up any risk there is at the moment. In essence, Eskom cross-subsidizes renewable generation that comes onto the system. That will be resolved with the introduction of our wholesale electricity market starting from next year. But, the reality is that this is very complex and very challenging. Maybe let me also just add to that. Generally, what we'd see is in the public sector, highly capacitated institutions also really leading some of this reform space. So you think of the regulatory environment and the ministerial departments. For example, in the UK, the equivalent of our NERSA and Department of Energy and Electricity in the UK, that's over 6,000 staff. We've got probably under 200. So fit for purpose, really focused, well-capacitated, forward-looking public sector institutions are critically needed. Eskom can't play the role of the regulator and the ministry and the utility. So I think, we need Eskom. There's certain things they can do better. They do need to focus on efficiencies. But, I think overall, there's certain things that they have, really done well.
That was James Mackay, CEO of the Energy Council of SA.